Hi, this is Steve from Chandler Woodworks, and in this video I'm going to show you start to finish how I make an epoxy river table. So what I'm doing here is just removing the bark from this slab English walnut. And the reason for this is you want to get the bark off of the hardwood because it really affects the bond between the wood and the epoxy if you don't. The way I like to do this is just take your old chisel out and you just go right at that seam where the hardwood meets the bark, and a few taps and you should be in. And you can see here is a good shot of it. Just get that started and you can start prying it away, and a lot of it will come off in big pieces if you're using properly dried wood. I definitely do recommend kiln dried wood. You don't necessarily need to have kiln dried wood, but you've got to have dry wood before you start one of these kind of projects, because otherwise you're going to run into all kinds of problems. And what you see me doing here is I'm just taking that chisel, and what I'm doing is removing the last of the bark. It's kind of like these papery strands that it's the first layer between the bark and the hardwood. And this isn't really necessary to do this because we're going to take an angle grinder anyway and clean all this up. But I like to use a chisel just to get as much of it off as I can, because we're going to make a lot of sawdust with the angle grinder, so you might as well just get it off of there. So like I mentioned just a second ago, you really want to have dry wood. And like I said, this slab was kiln dried, so you can see here it's reading very low. You can get one of these little digital moisture meters online. They don't run too much. I'll leave a link below in the description for you, but it's a very important part of the process. So I definitely recommend having one. So we're just going to cut this little piece off here, kind of following the natural curve. Next step, we're going to be ready for cleaning out any softwood. So it's pretty obvious that this is a bad section here, and you can see when I push the pencil in, it just goes right in. It's almost like pushing into a sponge. So we got to remove all that. And what you want to do, you just want to grab your chisels and you start prying this stuff out. So you can see it's coming out, no problem at all, really. Now what there is actually a little bit of hardwood inside of this rotted out section that I actually want to leave. We're gonna see how that turns out. So we're just gonna get all this cleared out by hand as much as we can, all the big stuff. And then I'm gonna take a rotary tool, and I'll show you how we do that in a second here, and just really go along and suck out with the vacuum also, and suck out all of this softwood that's in here. So now here I've switched over to the rotary tool, and I'm just going through this and just getting all the rest of it, really getting tight to the hardwood edges. And the thing is, when it hits hardwood, it's really not going to do anything to it. It kind of bounces off, so you got to be a little careful. I definitely don't recommend doing one hand with the rotary tool and the other hand with the vacuum unless you've had a little experience with this. So yeah, I don't like sawdust, so I'm just gonna suck it up. And I've done this quite a few times, but it's still probably not recommended. So now we're outside for the neighbor's favorite part, the angle grinder. So what I have here is this extreme cuts-all bit, and this thing is really good for shaping. And if you're doing a lot of live edge work, I would definitely recommend one of these. I've had this one now for probably 2 years, and it still looks brand new, other than how dirty it is. You definitely get your gloves on. You definitely want to wear a mask even if you're outside, because, you know, if the wind's blowing, who knows where this stuff is going. And what we're just going to do, we're just going to follow the contours of the edge here. And I'm not putting a lot of pressure. I'm just kind of letting I'm holding the tool firmly, but I'm just letting it kind of glide over the natural curves. And what we're doing, we're just getting all the last of that bark off and that little that papery stuff I showed you earlier. I'm just going to get all of that off, and that's going to give us the best area for the epoxy to bond to the wood. Now we're back in the shop, and what we're going to do is just square up both ends. So when we go to make our mold, we're going to have nice square ends for making the mold, so there's not too wide of gaps that epoxy can seep into and waste epoxy. It just makes it easier. And I like to do this in a couple passes. You can do it in one. Sometimes you get a little bit of burning on the ends, which isn't that big a deal. You can sand it off. This is going to be the top of the table. So what I'm doing, I'm just softening this edge here, you know, any little jagged points or any little areas that don't look quite right. I'm just going to smooth over with the sander, and that'll give us a nice transition from the wood to the epoxy. The last little cleanup on the live edge section, and we're going to be ready to build our mold next. So there's one more step I wanted to mention before we get this thing in the mold. What I'm doing here is just taking a seal coat and brushing it onto the entire top of the table. And the reason I'm doing this is just to help prevent any bleeds from the epoxy, because we're going to be dyeing this epoxy, and what can happen is some of the wood sometimes can absorb the epoxy and the color, and it just leaves kind of these unsightly spots that you can't really get off. So this is just a simple way to prevent that. It's just a utilitarian coat. It's nothing, you know, perfect. I'm just really kind of getting it on here. And it's especially important, I find, along the edges where the sapwood is, because that wood is always lighter and it tends to absorb color. So this is just an easy way to prevent that. And this is the last step before we put it in the mold. Now let's put our mold together. So this is a sheet of polypropylene, and I have another video talking about this stuff. I'll leave a link below for you. And we're gonna build our mold around this now. So what I like to do, I like to make sure it's level. You know, that'll help with your pour settling as level as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you can shim whatever table it's sitting on, and get it as close as you can. That'll help you. And what I'm doing here, I'm just hot gluing the sides. These are thin sheets of polypropylene that I ripped off of the main sheet. And I'm just going to go all the way around, get all these seams up the sidewalls and everything. And I'm going to do this on the entire perimeter of the mold. And then what we're going to do, we're going to come back and we're going to caulk over all of this hot glue when we're done. So now we're just going to seal all these joints with what I like to use. I like to use like silicone caulk, and we'll just go over the entire inside of the mold first. And I did not hot glue the inside. I like to just do caulking on the inside. I hot glued on the outside first. Okay, then we caulk on the inside. And then what I like to do is caulk on the outside over the hot glue. And don't go light here. Just glob it on there, and you really wanna seal over this hot glue. It just adds that much reinforcement and just ensuring that we're not gonna lose any epoxy out the sides of the mold. And the last step here, we're just gonna vacuum it up and clean it up a little bit. So let's get the slab in position back in the mold here. And the last part I'm gonna ask you guys is to please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell button to be alerted for new videos. And the last thing I wanna ask you is, what color do you want me to do here? It's gonna be either white or black, and I'd like you to leave a comment below and let me know what your choice is. And the next part of this video, we're gonna pick a color and we're gonna pour the resin, and we'll take it from there.